because I do expect just a Solenne choo-choo just riding away from everybody eventually in the middle of lap 1. We have the biggest showdown in potentially XTERRA history. We're going to talk about World Championships, the upcoming battle for who's going to wear the crown. Aneta, what do you think is going to happen this year? What is the biggest talking point?
I think the biggest talking point is the water temperature. Are we going to swim or are we going to witness a duathlon? No one wants to see a duathlon. No one wanted to see duathlon in Paris, and no one wanted to see a duathlon in Molveno, and definitely not me.
So what are the circumstances for the reasons why we're talking about it having a duathlon? Why would the swim be canceled?
Well, the water temperature is currently 11 degrees, according to my Google search, and the rules says if the XTERRA Molveno is going to follow the ITU rules, then that means the swim is cancelled. Under 12 degrees, the swim is cancelled. Under 13 degrees, it's shortened to half distance. And above 13 degrees, it should be 1.5K swim. But currently, it means cancellation.
So this is absolutely the biggest topic that we have to talk about. I think it's going to be, it's going to absolutely decide who's going to win. I think it's going to, on the men's side, it would be a very clear advantage in terms of one rider. On the women's side, I think it would very clearly disadvantage you, if you don't mind me saying that. But actually, it might not be a foregone conclusion because a lot of the top women do come out of the water together. But I think maybe something that we're not considering there is the water temperature itself and how people would deal with that. And maybe you might have something to say on that because you are a way better swimmer than I am.
Well, it wouldn't be the first duathlon we would see this season, right? We had a duathlon in Belgium. There it was due to the storm, I believe, and the current in the river. And we've seen that it has changed the podium. We've seen Jens Emil winning the first World Cup ever, I believe. And we saw Sandra Mairhofer winning a World Cup for the second time this season.
Yep.
I have not finished the race as many others, so definitely a game changer.
That was a very difficult race for Jens. It was his first ever long course victory. I think very deserved. And I think it's going to be a real reminder to all the top contenders on the men's side that nobody wants to go up against him in a duathlon. We were talking about this, and maybe we should touch upon this now. But recently in the Copenhagen Half Marathon, Jens just ran a 64-minute and 8 seconds, I think it was. I don't remember.
18, I believe.
18-second half marathon, which is unbelievable considering he's a multidiscipline athlete.
It's insane. I don't think he even prepared for it. I saw
not
on
properly. No,
No,
it's not his limit.
No, he's not a flat course runner. I think he wrote it on his Strava. He published one training where he said one first and last training session for a Copenhagen Half Marathon, and that was it. And out of that, he was 4th Danish to finish the race. It was a Danish championship, and 1:04. That is insane time.
No, absolutely insane. I mean, personally, I know that he was flirting with the idea of a podium, which is insane, of a podium on the Danish championships. So I don't know if this means that he's going to be unhappy with his result. I hope not, because getting a PB in a half marathon by 3 minutes, I think, is nothing to be upset about, and especially to put it into perspective. Jakob Ingebrigtsen, which is a name our listeners may have heard of. He's a pretty good runner. He was only 1 minute and 5 seconds ahead of Jens. An unbelievable performance when you measure it up to a comp.
Very impressive. And he did also the Danish championship in half Ironman, I believe.
Yeah.
I know he was not very happy with his bike performance, but he was very happy with his running performance. Yep. So we can see he is in very good shape for a duathlon.
Yep, exactly. For Jens, it's always a question of how big the gap off of out of the swim is going to be, and he's historically he's always been touted as the best cyclist in the field, but I don't personally necessarily believe that it is true, but it's not true in every single race. He's not able to deliver that result in every single race because of the effort he has to do which is for him an anaerobic effort, and for the guys out front, it's maybe, zone 4, zone 3, which means it's much more sustainable.
Do you know who had the fastest bike split in Prachatice on the women's field?
Who had the fastest bike split?
It was me.
Yeah, and it was a very impressive bike split.
I don't think I'm perceived as a strong cyclist, but after Prachatice, I think I need to be into consideration, especially on a track as is in Molveno.
Yeah, I think so too. I think if we're talking about Prachatice, first of all, I'd like to congratulate you on your fantastic performance. I really think that seeing you perform in front of your home audience was such a touching thing to experience, and I think also your tactics that you chose going into a race in terms of not overpacing the swim, not going too hard, that was fantastic.
I think I learned my lesson in Belgium, about pacing. And if we seen someone doing pacing right in Belgium, it was Marta Menditto. She also won the cross triathlon world championship in Australia, also cross duathlon, and she would be one of those people that will be very pleased if it's a duathlon in Molveno.
Yep. And similarly, talking about winners of the ITU World Championship, Michele Bonacina. Now, listen, everybody thinks he's a shark. He is a shark, right? I don't think that's necessarily his strongest discipline. I think he's an unbelievably underrated cyclist. And sure, maybe he went a bit too hard. Occasionally, he goes a bit too hard. So
we all do.
Yeah, we all do. But to give a little bit of context, when I was at XTERRA Czech, and I had the fantastic opportunity to watch the race, Michele Bonacina followed Felix Foressier for 60 or 80% of the bike, and they weren't going exactly slow. They were making time on Emil Sloth Nielsen, who was considered the strongest bike rider in the field. They gained a minute on him in before losing it because they went too hard. But I think that Michele is an unbelievable bike rider who people don't consider an unbelievable bike rider.
I think we've seen it in all the short tracks, actually. Because he leads the swim, obviously, just like I do. And he managed to keep the advantage for quite some time.
He holds on,
Unfortunately, he has broken his wrist or arm in Taiwan. So he missed that one. But since then, he is on quite a progress curve.
He's really progressed incredibly well. I think he went from being relatively inconsistent last year, from scoring fantastic results in the short track, and then maybe the long distance he didn't have his own day, and maybe vice versa the next race around. This year he's obviously, as you mentioned, from that terrible crash he had in Taiwan, he's progressed unbelievably well, and I think he's world champion. He's the only guy on the start list that can say that, next to Marta Menditto, and I think he has to be pleased with himself, no matter what result he gets. Obviously, I don't think he's going to be a contender for the win. I think he can be a dark horse for the podium in terms of the men's.
Definitely top 5 contender.
Definitely top 5 contender. But don't be surprised if you see him underperforming or overperforming. Michele is just that type of rider. You never know when he has diamonds in the legs.
Do we have such a contender on the women's side? The women are quite consistent. We saw Solenne Billouin dominating this season. She has won every single race but 2. She has not won in Belgium where she was sick, and she has not won in Oak Mountain where she had a flat tire. Otherwise, she has won. And obviously, Prachatice, she had a fever. I have seen her in the morning. She did not look well. She finished the race anyway. I'm very impressed by that. Otherwise, she has won every single race.
Same with Belgium. She also raced there when she was sick, and she got second place, which is unbelievable. That's just a next level performance, and I think everybody in the women's field is going to be looking at Solenne and thinking, okay, how
Is
are
she
you
gonna
today?
win third time?
Are you going to win again?
Yeah.
I think in terms of the women's field, the repeat, the three-peat is so much more likely from her side, maybe than from Arthur. I think Arthur has a lot more competition in terms of Felix and in terms of Jens. Also, another dark horse I think we're not talking about is Lukáš Kočař, but just circling back over to the women's field, I think it's competitive. I think it's fantastic. It's going to be very competitive. I think somebody like Sandra Mairhofer is going to be very hard to read.
But she's gonna be very motivated.
She's going to be very much.
I think she really wanted to win last year, but then she had a crash in Prachatice and didn't have such a good race in Molveno.
Mhm.
This year we haven't seen her on her best in Prachatice neither. So we'll see if she had a good preparation leading to Molveno, or
Mhm.
and if she's finally gonna be able to win on a home soil.
Yep. And obviously, then we should talk about a certain rider named Aneta Grabmüller. I think
I think we said enough.
we said enough, but obviously if there is no swim, then it hurts you. If there is a swim, it helps you. It depends on if you're comfortable in 13-degree water.
I think that's gonna be a big element as well, right? Because swimming in 13-degree water is not just swimming. It's
Yeah.
swimming in a really cold water. I
Yeah.
have my neoprene hat ready,
Oh,
but
don't share too
and-
much information.
nah, I think anyone can take a neoprene hat, you know.
Mhm.
I don't think it slows you down too much. Like, obviously you have that attached under your chin.
Mhm.
It might not be the most comfortable. You don't hear anything, which I'm really annoyed by, but it definitely keeps your hat a bit warmer.
Mhm.
And I have recently raced in 15-degree water here in Norway. That
Mhm.
was really cold. I cannot imagine how 13-degree water will feel for
Yeah.
your feet, for your hands. You know, taking off that wetsuit, that is gonna be a game changer, definitely.
Yeah, trying to warm up afterwards after getting out of the water. We've seen some really, really cold years in Molveno when it's been rainy. Imagine if it's cold and rainy after you get out of the water. I mean, you could even potentially have health risks with some of the athletes going too hard.
And I think we witnessed actually such a cold race in XTERRA France in 2021 when it wasn't cold, the water wasn't cold, and it wasn't cold at the start, but the temperature dropped during the race, I think down to 5 degrees, and we saw the elite men drop out, and we saw Arthur drop out. So it is gonna be a massive factor if we gonna have that kind of conditions, which is most likely. We are only 7 days from the short track, so that's not gonna change much.
Yeah, it's and as you said, the temperature or the perceived temperature of the water with every degree that it gets colder changes so much. It's not a marginal thing. It's as somebody who did a little bit of cold water swimming, the differences between that is huge. And so maybe even considering something like, gloves, swim gloves, neoprene gloves,
We
maybe.
saw that at T100 in the US, right? People were swimming in those neoprene shoes. So
Mhm.
I might be checking them online now.
Yep.
But I have been to Molveno this summer. It
And
was
how was it?
It was mid-July and the water was freezing. I did not want to swim open water, and I love open water.
Mhm.
But that water was really cold, so I cannot imagine what it's gonna be like at the end of September.
Speaking about Molveno, could you give us a rundown of the course so that our listeners kind of understand a little bit more who it suits?
So I have seen the course this July, and
Mhm.
even though the course hasn't been changed since last year, there are going to be some changes because one of the downhills is under construction. It's one of the trails. So Molveno is very specific. Like, you get out of the water, you do this one little loop around the river, and then you start climbing. And you climb for really, really long time. And then you turn, you do some artificially built trails before you get on this short part of a more natural trail. And then you just ride in the Molveno village on the stairs, and you do the lap for two. You do the lap the 2 times. So it is very specific, and I don't think there is a comparable race on the World Cup circuit. So we cannot really say that this race is going to be similar to some other. I think this is going to be a very specific race. There's going to be mud, because there has been mud mid-July when it was sunny, and there still has been mud. So I think we can be certain about that. And I mean, we've seen Solenne Billouin really liking this course. So that, I don't think that's going to change. I don't think there are going to be any surprises. We haven't seen any surprises on the start list neither. There is, we could maybe see Flora Duffy or Hayden Wild after the Olympics, but the start list for the short track doesn't show any of these names. So we can expect a battle of people that has been doing the World Cup this year.
Yep. And maybe somebody you did mention, you didn't mention that question of a dark horse for women's. Maybe Loanne. It is always hard within XTERRA to estimate how good a performance is, and especially Loanne's running performance in Prachatice. If it is, after all, a duathlon, I think it really could benefit her, because Loanne sometimes is perceived as a very strong mountain biker, and I think, but obviously her strengths lie on the run. And if it is a double run, I wouldn't be surprised if Solenne had some competition there from her, and maybe from Sandra, and maybe from you. You really honestly never know what could happen. But that's somebody who maybe we should have mentioned.
For sure. And we haven't seen Loanne racing the World Cup. She has focused on ITU races this year. So I guess she was focusing on running even more than usual. So I think she will be definitely a contender to look after. And I think Solenne might be a bit scared. Yep. But I think Anna Zehnder is also one of the people to look at for, because she is an incredible runner as well.
Yeah, Anna's an unbelievable runner. I think for her, it would be good if it was an aquathlon. Am I saying that correctly?
Yeah, aquathlon.
Anna swims well, but on the bike, I think she's clearly struggled. She hasn't been able to keep up the pace with where maybe her run would put her. And I'm looking at her as somebody who next year could really very easily threaten the top 3, could be a consistent top 3 contender. And she's been unbelievable this year as somebody who...
She's very consistent.
Exactly. She's been so consistent. She, quote unquote, came out of nowhere, and all of a sudden she's placing top 4s. She's currently, I think, sitting 3rd overall in the World Cup, isn't she? Fourth?
Yeah, that is Alizée Patiès. We haven't talked about Alizée neither.
We haven't talked about Alizée. Why haven't we talked about Alizée, Aneta?
Well, she was consistent, but not her best. We saw her winning last year, but this year she hasn't won a race yet. But she has been consistently on podium. I don't think that's because she is worse than she has been last year. Yeah. I think everyone else is just getting better. The competition is so tight.
Exactly. I mean, Alizée has said that the World Championship is a A-level priority for her. Obviously, I believe that. It's a A-level priority for everybody.
Everyone.
But on the other hand, I think you would like to at least test that form going into a race somewhere. You would probably, I imagine, want to have 2 peaks within your season, just so that you know how the legs are turning over, just so that you can really... I imagine she wouldn't have been taking the World Cups easily. She would have been peaking for probably every single one of them. She would have had them as her a priority. She wouldn't have just trained through them. So I think her level cannot be only explained as, oh, I'm just peaking for World Cup, which I feel like...
She just shared a video where she mentioned that she was testing altitude training this year, and that she was testing it before Canada. But unfortunately, in Canada, she has broken her chain and did not finish the race. And we have seen her strength in the Prachatice short track. I think she demonstrated how competitive she is.
That was an incredible race from her.
Yes, she was very strong. I couldn't keep up on the bike. So I believe she will be peaking in Molveno. We will see some competition there.
I think so too. For the short track, definitely we will see her racing there. The short track, I think, is overall going to be more competitive than the long edition. I think it's going to be so much more interesting, maybe, because I do expect just a Solenne choo-choo just riding away from everybody eventually in the middle of lap one, as we saw last year, essentially. And somebody who was actually able to keep up with her is not here. Dita Diedrichs.
Yes, she is racing Nice Ironman World Championship. So another name that is missing, together with a couple of Americans, and Maeve Kennedy is not here. So a lot of people are missing, I would say.
I think Dita could have figured again for the win, potentially even, if she had raced the entirety of the World Cup, and if she had really, really, really doubled down on her mountain biking skills, because that was the only thing that was missing last time. She had very clearly, she was the only person in the field to have Solenne's level, or be close to it. But here, obviously, she isn't starting.
I think that racing the Aneta World Cup really gives you the experience you need on the mountain bike, especially if you don't have a mountain bike background like Alizée does. It's like just racing and racing and racing and experiencing different terrains and getting the skills like helps you a lot. Like I think I'm I'm the proof of it. But someone else we haven't seen on the World Cup circuit is Lukáš Kočař. He hasn't raced the whole season.
Nope.
He has raced ITU World Championship in Australia, had a crash, and now he's coming to Molveno.
Crashed out. He has some unfinished business. He said he really prioritized the race, and he was really disappointed by his performance. He limped through the run with a swollen and inflated knee. I felt really bad for him.
That looked horrible.
That looked terrible. Lukáš is he's difficult to read. I think sometimes he can race in an unintuitive manner. You will see him often pulling big groups with favorites in him up, giving them draft on the bike, only to have them attack away from him and drop him. I think maybe potentially even either the triathlon or the duathlon could suit him. He is such an incredibly strong triathlete, and I think his mental fortitude to be able to, as we said, push through a injured knee and run through the entire thing, I think that's exactly the type of grit you're looking for if it is 13 degrees and raining and muddy, and you just came out of 13-degree water.
But it's no secret he actually doesn't like these kind of conditions.
Yes.
He shared it, I think, last week, that he's hoping that finally for the third time there's not going to be mud in Molveno, which is unlikely.
Yep.
But we saw he recovered from his knee injury. He had to validate his spot in Molveno by racing another XTERRA race. So he did this tiny race in XTERRA Shumava.
Yep.
He has won it. And
needless to say, he did pretty well. Yep.
Yeah, he did all right. So I'm really curious what to expect from him.
I don't know. I think Lukáš is hard to say. He could win. He could win. He could come top 10. He could. It's really hard to say how he's going to feature. I hope it's not in a way in which he just pulls a group of favorites and then gets dropped by them. I really hope he rides a tactically astute race. I understand his approach to racing is often, but he likes to set his own tempo and doesn't worry about what's happening behind him. But the level nowadays is so high, and the differences between the athletes are so minimal that even a couple percentage points saved here and there drafting do matter. And I've talked to plenty of athletes about this, and it's a recurring theme with Lukáš. I think it's interesting how it often plays out with Jens and with Lukáš, because Lukáš not being in the race and not pulling the group of favorites actually really benefits Jens, because that means that the favorites actually have to work, and therefore they're not going as fast as having a complete truck in front of them, which Lukáš is. Because obviously always when Jens comes out with a 2-minute deficit on the swim. However, if it's a duathlon, I think it would be a really, really interesting tactical race where I think also somebody like the two main favorites, we should probably talk about the two main favorites, Felix Foressier and Arthur Serrieres. I hope I'm pronouncing those names right. I heard them once, and
French names, huh?
the French names are pretty difficult for me to pronounce as a
So we apologize, but
we do apologize.
we know what we're talking about.
Felix and R4 have been going back and forth this year, essentially. Arthur has shown an incredible level. So has Felix. Felix has maybe not been as dominant as he was last season. Last season, he was really incredibly dominant, and he seemed like the man to beat going into Molveno.
But he has not been off the podium. He has finished on a podium every single race.
He's going to win the World Cup.
We haven't talked about that yet, because not only World Championship title is to grab next week, but also the overall. And I don't think there will be any surprises. We see Solenne very comfortably in the first position. We see Felix in the first place. Can anyone beat them?
Okay, can I get your predictions on one thing?
Yes.
We currently have Felix Foressier sitting at 769 points and Solenne Billouin sitting at 763 points. Who do you think is going to end this with a higher point total?
My guess is Solenne.
Yeah, I agree. I think I agree.
And there is only one possibility that Solenne wouldn't win, and that's that she does not finish any of the races and Marta Menditto wins them both. That's the only scenario which would end up for Solenne not winning.
Actually, mathematically, Alizée could also win, and Alizée could win. Alizée could win mathematically. However, as you said, it's that would mean Solenne not finishing a single of the races. For Solenne, she needs to come top 15, I think, in any one of the races. And for her, that's just like a zone 2 ride. But speaking of dropping out, it can happen, of course. I would see Alizée more likely to win the World Cup in that case than Marta, because Alizée is only 8 points behind Marta.
I just wanted to say there are only 8 points in between Alizée and Marta. So we might see a change there.
Exactly.
I have a 13 points to Sandra Mairhofer in 5th. So that can be also a tight race for the top 5. On the men's side, is there anyone that could attack the top 3?
Top 3, no. I don't see the top 3. I think Michele will definitely move. Well, yeah, he'll move into the top 5, I would say.
Yeah, Arthur is probably not racing.
Yeah, Arthur is probably not racing, no, with his injury that he sustained in Czech. So he should move into the top 5. Other than that, really don't see a lot of movement. It is, to some extent, important to these riders where they place, wherever they are. We look at it as a podium. So Marta and Alizée both come on the podium, but it is important if they come second or third for them, because it is €3,500 in prize money difference, which is
that is significant. If you want to be a professional XTERRA rider, this matters.
Yeah.
It can ensure your income for a couple of months.
Exactly. So we maybe don't look at it as a very important thing, but I think for these girls they will care.
Yes. And how much it would differ if there was a choker, if not all the races would count, which was a big discussion this year. I think every single race we talked about it. This year the rule was that every race counts. It was different last year, right? Last year you could have missed 2 or 3 races.
I think it was two drop races.
Two races. And we can see Alizée hasn't finished in Canada and is in 3rd place because of that. Me and Sandra, we missed both 3 races, and we are both 5th and 6th. On the men's side, Arthur has decided not to race in Taiwan, and he currently sits in a 3rd place. So how much it would differ?
I think somebody like Arthur could potentially even be thinking about maybe not the overall, but he could be thinking about it, if he had attended Taiwan, because imagine an extra 100 points on his total, or 90. It makes a big difference.
I'm really wondering, what was that decision about, not going to Taiwan? And I think we need to invite these people and talk to them about it.
I think so too.
Yes.
Artur, if you're listening, we would be very happy to have
This is
you.
an invite.
This is absolutely an invite.
So I think it would be interesting to see if that rule is going to be changed next year, because right now the world ranking benefits those that race every single race, but are not necessarily the best.
Yes, I agree, but also I would say the way that the points are structured, it really, really heavily prioritizes good results. So if you are able to get a win somewhere, you actually get a lot of points. And so maybe having middling results in a couple races, you would prefer having a win because you will have a much more results. Obviously, this doesn't work for where you are currently seated, in the top 5, talking about the top 5. But for most athletes, talking about the top 30, the top 20, actually good results are prioritized. And people who have one-off results beat out people who have consistently come to the races and come 25th or 20th. If you just get one top 10, the differences in points are really big.
And it is really a question, what should be prioritized, good results or consistency?
I think you should. I think the system should be reworked. Currently, you cannot want everybody to attend every single race and also prioritize good results over consistency. That's just not being consistent within your message. I think another thing you have to consider is the athlete's health. Solenne raced this year multiple times with fever. It is not acceptable. As a race organizer, you cannot be liable for having your athletes race with fever. For the health of that athlete and for the health of the other athletes around you, I think a drop system rule must be implemented. Obviously, some athletes may misuse it, most won't, and that's the reason why you're making
most of us are not professional athletes. We have our jobs, we have families. So for most of us, it's something that we do in our free time, and racing on 3 different continents from March to September every single month. It is a lot. And I have decided myself after Belgium that I'm not going to race in Canada. And now I'm only fighting for top 5 instead of podium. But that was a conscious decision, right? But I think it should be taken into consideration.
I completely agree. I think Canada is the number one race that probably would have gotten abandoned by most people because having to travel, let's face it, most of the contenders field is European based, having to travel from Europe to the US, back to Europe, back to North America.
North America.
That's a lot. That's
a lot of money. A lot,
that's a lot of energy that you have to spend as a professional athlete when you could be doing a really good training block, prepping for Molveno, prepping for the European Championship in Patiès. And that's why I feel like we saw a lot of people skipping.
Yeah, and for most of us, going to another continent is so expensive that if you're lucky and you're on the podium, the prize money might just pay your travel expenses. And that's about it, nothing else.
Exactly.
So you need to really make some calculations and take all of that into consideration when you're planning your season.
Okay, Aneta, do we have any other points we would like to touch on before we wrap this up?
No, I don't think so. I think we covered it all, and now we just have to wait.
We should give a prediction. I think we should give our predictions of a podium. Let's say podium for men and women's long course.
Solenne, Billouin, and I'm gonna be.
I think Jens and Solenne. What about the short track? There, I think we could see an upset.
I think it can be really tight in the short track for women's side.
But, and for the men.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. We saw a finish line sprint in Patiès. So, but I'm gonna go with the same. I'm gonna go with Solenne and Felix.
You're gonna go for the same. You think you're gonna double up? Oh my goodness.
I think so.
After last year's drama, where Artur took a wrong turn and Jens won the short track, which I will say my piece on this now. Jens was stolen a win in Belgium last year when Arthur Foressier did not wait in the penalty box long enough. It is very clearly on camera. You can see it on YouTube. Jens was taken. He was supposed to win that race. He was supposed to win the short track. So it was a bit of karma that went back his way. I think for the women's, I think you win.
Oh, thank you.
And I think Lukáš Kočař. I think we're gonna have a Czech double.
Exciting. I'm gonna change my bet on Jens Emil actually.
You are.
Because I think he can win the short track. Because
the short track
I think he would win in Prachatice the full distance race if he didn't get 90 seconds of penalties.
Jens has the level currently to compete with the top two best in the world, which are Arthur and Felix. However, sadly, he wasn't able to make sure that he didn't get penalized during the race, which resulted in him not being competitive for the win.
Just to be clear, he got a penalty for undressing. He was topless. Yes. Which we, by coincidence, talked about the week before. It's the ITU rule, and it is respected in the Czech Republic. So he got penalty for that. He got a penalty for a wrong position of a bike in the transition area, which we have heard about at the briefing. For the first time, the briefing for athletes was mandatory, and it was talked about. So again, his fault. And the last penalty was for coming to the transition area late.
Leaving the transition area late as well.
Very questionable, isn't it?
It is questionable. It is, but also there are two other penalties which should have been taken care of. We're just talking about an overall trend here. Jens, if he gets it right, it's terrible. But if Jens gets it right, he wins. He has the level, but he didn't. What can you do?
Well, let's hope he can win in Molveno. I have a last question for you, Oliver. What is your XTERRA nickname?
Some may consider me a super fan, although I don't know if this is public information.
It should be, because that's the reason why you're hosting this podcast, isn't it?
Maybe.
Yes.
That may be the only thing that makes me qualified, is I like to talk about things and I like to collect data about certain things.
Well, we will make sure to bring those into the next episode. Thank you for listening to your #1 XTERRA and off-road triathlon podcast. Exactly. See you next time.